Hello and welcome to Off My Shelves, and this is another episode of Demolishing my to-be read pile. We are on to the month of August because I'm still playing catch up because I fell behind pretty much. So let's get underway with August. August is going to be, like last month, a relatively straightforward month because like last month where I mainly read loads of Batman and loads of Preacher, this month I read mainly Jonathan Hickman's Avengers Run. But to backtrack slightly and look at Goodreads, the first book I read of the month was Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft and the adaptation and art by Go Tanabe. Now, I just did a video on that because I enjoyed it so much it got its own little video. Very good book. I enjoyed it immensely. Great art. But in general, a really solid adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's work, I think. If you do want a more detailed description and video, then I would recommend that. The other things this month is because I fell so far behind, I focused a lot on a few of these books already. So Time Under Tension, Search and Destroy and Delights were three books that are featured in my 4 Fantagraphics reads video, which again I'll link and put a card up. Now I focused on Search and Destroy because that's a recent manga reinterpretation of a very famous work by Osamu Tezuka, Dororo. So it's modernising it all, changing the gender of the main character in a really good way. So those of you who hate gender swaps, don't be too scared or intimidated. It does work quite well, I think. And it puts it in a more of a cyberpunk reality. Dororo was a series where a man's lust for power pushed him to sacrifice his unborn child's organs, body parts, every part of him out to demons. And so this child was born with practically no chance of survival, but he survived and he prospered and then fought the demons to get his body parts back. This version has elements of that, but we don't fully know the origins of how she came to end up with all her body parts missing. It features her initially trying to get her tongue back, her eyes back from robotic creatures rather than demons, and it fits into that more of a cyberpunk aesthetic. It's amazing art and I love it, and the fact that the art was all done on iPad as well is really amazing. I think it shows how far digital artwork is going in a very simplistic way. So you look at this artwork and you think that's astounding, and the artist, as far as I know, just used an iPad and an iPen, Apple Pencil, which is amazing to me. Very good read. Volume 2 is coming out soon. And yeah, check out the other video. Time Under Tension by M.S. Harkness is a biography of M.S. Harkness and her struggles with life, how she puts herself out there as a prostitute to earn more money on the side, how she's training to be a personal trainer as well as an author and artist, and her just coming to the end of her education in arts and literacy and all that, and then going off into the world and trying to get up off the ground as an artist and trying to get her life in order. Lovely artwork, really graphic in many places. It doesn't pull any punches, but equally it doesn't pull any judgments as well. It doesn't judge any personal situation really, and it just lays out the facts as they happen. You know, it shows her life, and she neither says that that's a good thing or a bad thing. She allows you to do a lot of the judgment work if you wanted to. Either way, it's a really good kind of biography of a woman in the modern day, kind of trying to use her brains, her skills, her body and everything to get by, and not really, you know, feeling bad or upset or segregated for using her body or for pushing herself forward. She's a really interesting person in many ways, but her biography really struck me as quite confident and quite interesting. There's a lot of childhood abuses that come in but don't define the story really, but it's certainly worth a look, I think. Delights, which is the last of those 4 Fantagraphics read with their own videos, and Delights was a look at the creation of the Garden of Earthly Delights, a painting by Hieronymus Bosch. The details on that painting's creation are quite scant and quite hard to pin down, so the artist and writer Guy Caldwell basically adores the painting so much that he kind of created his own fictional version of the creation of this painting, hypothesizing how the people of the local village and the people of the powers that be reacted to this painting and how the artist got the people to sit for these weird positionings and stuff like that. It's a really interesting book, I thought. I often think that people with passion, when they tell a story, it comes across really well and you enjoy that story tenfold because of the passion. And this is one of those. Guy Caldwell clearly looked at that painting intensely and just thought, I want to know more about it. I want to understand the creation. But because that information ain't there, he created his own narrative. Yeah, bits of reality have been peppered in, but in general, it's his version of the creation of this legendary painting. Before we get into Jonathan Hickman, I also read another Tintin, The Land of the Black Gold. A really fun story. Bonkers in this start because it involves a lot of car engines and cars exploding. But then, weirdly, that kind of start and that premise, which takes off a big chunk of the beginning of the book, kind of gets almost sidelined when they go to certain countries and get some indication of what's happening. But then they get dragged into other direction, and it's only towards the end they go, oh, that's what was making the engines explode. So it's slightly disjointed, but again, still an enjoyable story. I think when they go into the desert and focus more on finding out the truth behind why cars are exploding and getting pulled in these other directions, that's when it gets a bit more interesting, really, because it is a bit of a slow starter, because again, it's not really that interesting that cars are randomly exploding. Why are they randomly exploding? It just wasn't that. I wasn't instantly hooked, but the later part of the book was very good. I thought it was pretty good. I didn't like it as much as previous Tintins, but there was nothing terribly wrong with it either. Absolute all-star Superman. Yeah, it's a fantastic read, this. Absolute All-Star Superman is definitely my favourite Superman story. A lot of people's favourite Superman story. The Superman that's in it is such a confident, mellow, amazing character that it's one of the few times I really admired Superman and wasn't frustrated by him. Because Superman is so easily used in a frustrating way, I think, because he's got such amazing powers, because he's such this kind of Jesus-like figure in the DC universe. He can be very frustrating sometimes, but I think in this context, because the opening pages outline that he's been exposed to too much of the sun's kind of rays and the sun's energy, that it's overloading his cells and he's dying, and so he's deciding to try and wrap up a few things and do a few things before he dies. He gets visited by future selves and future incarnations to tell him how long he's got, and that he goes through different trials at the end of days before he dies. And so he knows all this is coming, but the calmness and the level-headedness he takes all this news is amazing, because he doesn't panic or he doesn't get upset. He just knows he's got a limited amount of time, so he gets on with jobs at hand. He tries to take care of his loved ones, deals with issues that come up in front of him, and just literally works through it all. And each little story he gets pulled into has its own little unique, interesting bits, like the early stories where he's giving Lois Lane Superman powers for 24 hours, and then there's this whole competition between Samsung and other superheroes to vie for Lois Lane because she's now Super Lois Lane, and all of that's a really interesting tale. And then the next story arc or so goes into the Bizarro universe, and then another one brings him into contact with Supermans from different times and dimensions, and all building towards a really solid face-off with Lex Luthor, who initially caused his exposure to the sun's power. And yeah, and it's really solidly paced, interesting. The artwork by Frank Whiteley is phenomenal. It really is some of his best work, I think. If you like his artwork, then this is the quintessential Whiteley, I think. It just shows that movement on the panel that he does so well in such small spaces, and when those splash pages come. I mean, that opening page of him, Superman, flying with the sun beneath him is just absolutely mind-blowing and astounding. It just blew me away when I first saw that. And the artwork overall, every single page, there's something to really adore and dig into and just love. There's a brilliant Jimmy Olsen story in it as well, where Jimmy Olsen kind of comes into contact with a bit of doomsday. And yeah, if you haven't read it, and I don't want to spoil it, pick it up, have a read of it. It's in every format you can imagine. I got the Absolute because it maximizes the artwork, and I love the absolute version. It's one of those that are going to stay on my shelf forever. This is probably the 4th or 5th time I read this story, but the first time I read it in absolute format, which is why it's on this list, because the absolute version, this is the first time I read it, because I bought it and it's just been sitting there nice and patiently, and I knew I would come to it because I'm going to come to it again and again. But yeah, it's just a great story. Now we get to the main event, Jonathan Hickman's Avengers run. Now, there's a lot of books in this, and essentially I went through them all in the deluxe version. So I've got the deluxe version of Avengers Volume 1 and New Avengers Volume 1. Hickman's series went Avengers, New Avengers, and jump in between the two all the way. There isn't really a way of reading the one without the other, because they do rely on each other loads. And at certain points, they actively undercut each other, so you really can't progress anymore without reading the other one, because there's such vital story in one or the other at different points. I started off with Avengers and then jumped onto New Avengers, and I tried to kind of read them in some order. I haven't got the omnibuses, which put everything in nice, neat order. Avengers, as it starts, is the weaker of the two. New Avengers starts with all guns blazing. It brings back the Illuminati, so you got T'Challa, you got Iron Man, you got Namor, you got Doctor Strange, you get Beast instead of Professor Xavier, and you get Captain America in there as well. And so they basically come together and they try to deal with a problem that's come up, and the problem that's come up is incursions. So the multiverse is collapsing, and Earth is at the centre. So two Earths are colliding constantly. They come into contact, and then you've got a certain amount of time before, if one is destroyed, then the other one survives, and that's the universe's overall, not just the planet. So this is some big, universe affecting storyline going on, really. The Illuminati pick up on this and try to find a way of avoiding destroying another Earth that's come into contact with theirs totally, because they don't want to destroy planets, obviously. But it's a slippery slope. They know they have to make these bad decisions to continue the Earth's survival, and they're all infighting and arguing, and the premise itself, right off the bat, is so strong that it just leaves the normal Avengers line for dust. That starts off with the Builders storyline. The Builders are this omnipotent kind of power race that have been there ever since the start of time, and they've been creating universes and beings to shape the course of the universe. And it starts off with one of their creations adapting the environment of Mars and changing the Earth. The changes they make on the Earth, they send these kind of bombs that change the biology and life on wherever the bombs land, and so they land on like 5 or 6 different parts of Earth, and they come in and out of the story quite heavily going forward. And so different Avengers teams and different storylines visit each of these sites, which have evolved differently and created different beings. There's a lot of new superheroes that are created as well, but it does start off far more kind of high concept than the straightforward one Earth colliding with another Earth, what are we going to do? Which I think is why New Avengers works so well, because it instantly creates this dynamic where, what are we going to do? Are we going to become Earth destroyers, or are we going to leave our Earth die? What would we rather do? So the two plots go on, and slowly but surely the builders, the creators of these beings on Mars that the Avengers are fighting with and struggling with, then come onto the scene and start annihilating all of the universe and taking all these different empires like the Sheer Empire and all that under their wing. And so the whole empires around the universe combine forces to fight the builders. That then leads to Infinity, the miniseries. That was the next one I read, and that is essentially just a universe-spanning adventure where our Avengers are fighting the builders and really kind of, showing the world how to do it. Humans are amazing at the end of the day, and they really outdo everyone, which I'm sure the fact that Captain America is outdoing like every other being is amazing. The other thing is that Captain America has a bit of conflict of interest with the Illuminati, and they separate, and that plays into later volumes. gets a bit more Civil War-like later on, but we'll get to that in a second. Because when the Avengers leave to fight the Builders, they leave Tony and a few other members on the Earth, and then Thanos comes to conquer the Earth. Now, the only reason they stay on the Earth is because they know that the incursions, as they call them, these planets coming together, are going to happen, and they need to be there to protect the Earth. But then Thanos comes and dominates the Earth, so you've got battles on all fronts, and Infinity is really fun, I think, because it is stacking every single odd against it. It's not focused too much on kind of, one set of people or another. It's bouncing all over the place, and it's really fun. But then after that, you come back and investigate in Avengers, the different sites across the Earth, and that's all great. But again, it's not that powerful, I don't think. It's okay, but it's not fantastic on every level. The New Avengers, on the other hand, continues to be exceptional. I think it continues to be far better a story because the conflicts within the Illuminati between Namor and T'Challa and all these other little conflicts are brewing over, but equally they are now kind of, on the precipice of destroying other planets to save their own, and they're all struggling with that decision. And then Captain America comes back and all hell breaks loose when he finds out Tony's plan to destroy other Earths and things like that. So it does turn into very much a Civil War type story then, where the Avengers split and one part of the Avengers is trying to take out the other part of the Avengers because they think they've lost their mind by destroying other Earths, because there must be another way of doing it. All of this is pretty pointless though, because there is nothing stopping the Earths kind of being destroyed. And so slowly but surely certain things happen, which means there's a tiny amount of Earths remaining, and then that all leads then into Secret Wars. So we go into Time Runs Out kind of storyline into Secret Wars, and yeah, Secret Wars is really conceptual, because as a reader you're thrown in there, and the fact that you're in this world already that has been created in the aftermath of all worlds being destroyed is really weird enough. But then the way it's set up and how it's set up is really bizarre as well. But equally, if you kind of relax into it, I suppose, and don't question things too much and allow those things and answers to come slowly but surely, then you should enjoy it. But it is quite frustratingly, hard to understand in the first couple of pages, I think, in the first couple of issues, because it is so different from what's come before. Essentially, it was Marvel's way of bringing everything back to just one Earth, essentially, and getting rid of all the other multiverses and bringing them back into one. And now I suppose they've gone back on that a bit, but either way, it's all built into that. I definitely think that the New Avengers story arc is stronger than the Avengers. Don't get me wrong, the Avengers story arc does definitely have highlights and high points, but overall I far more enjoyed that closer, smaller group of people with their infighting and their constant problematic issues with what's in front of them and how to deal with it. That was great. Secret Wars was enjoyable, but it was really conceptual and really hard to understand in places, and you have to keep going, well, how is that? Well, how is this? But then it's enjoyable as well, which is always weird with Hickman. Sometimes he's like Morrison, he does something that's quite conceptual and hard to grasp and hard to explain, but it's still enjoyable. So even though it's kind of frustratingly difficult to understand exactly what's happening, it's still enjoyable. And I would say that about Secret Wars, it is still fun to read and to watch, and certainly the characters that it ends with and the reasoning why the incursions are happening are all good. But again, it doesn't really go in the way that you might think it will go, and it doesn't really happen in the way you think. The ultimate reason why the incursions are happening is interesting but hard to grasp. But then some of the core characters who are there at the end and battling out against each other are really good. I mean, they utilise probably the best villain in the Marvel Universe, in my opinion, to be the main villain in Secret Wars. And he's peppered throughout the Avengers and New Avengers storyline. And so him being there at the centre is really good, because I think he gets bad press and bad storylines sometimes, does old Doctor Doom. But he's a fantastic character, and certainly my favourite villain in the Marvel Universe. There's a lot of story there to explain in the amount of time I explained, so hopefully it made some sense what I was saying. But that is all I read in August. I will move on to September and try my best to catch up with myself soon enough. Thank you very much for watching. I will catch you on the next one.